There are many challenges in the world that distract or diversify our attention, but this one in our own hemisphere is incredibly important. Last May, after 40 deaths, more than 50 documented cases of torture, high-profile political persecutions, thousands of arbitrary and unlawful detentions by the Venezuelan government, this committee met to review the shocking pattern of systematic human rights violations by the Maduro government, its security forces, and its judicial system, which continues today and has only gotten worse. Venezuela is awash in a culture of gross impunity at every level. Checks and balances on executive power have completely eroded. There is no accountability for the crimes against Venezuelan citizens by an out-of-control regime. It should come as no surprise, as Venezuela's fiscal and economic crisis has deepened, that the Maduro government is radicalizing its tactics. Last month, the Minister of Defense, Padrino Lopez, signed a decree authorizing security forces to use lethal force against civilians. And with that decree came the tragic death of 14-year-old Cluverth Roa, who was shot in the head by the National Police. We saw, as has been said here, the elected mayor of Caracas, Antonio Ledesma, forcibly removed from his office and jailed on trumped-up charges. And more than a year after his arrest, Leopoldo Lopez, the continent's most high-profile political prisoner, continues to languish in prison without a trial, without any semblance of due process. And just last week, in an unacceptable and utterly grotesque statement, Venezuela's ambassador to the OAS, Roy Chatterton, actually joked about shooting members of the Venezuelan opposition in the head. Against this backdrop of persecution, violence, and outrageous human rights violations, now even more disturbing trends started to emerge. Just last week, the Treasury Department announced that the Banco Privada de Andorra, BPA, was involved in a complex scheme to launder nearly $2 billion, let me repeat that, $2 billion in funds from the Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA. PBA then moved these funds into the U.S. financial system. In December, a private jet trafficking millions of dollars in cocaine was captured in Fort Lauderdale. In September, a truck carrying $10 million in cash coming for the United States was captured in Venezuela. All of this on the top of the thousands of pounds, literally tons, of cocaine trafficked by the Venezuelan National Guard that has been seized in Europe. The United States and the international community cannot tolerate such blatant violations of international law. I am pleased that the Treasury has named senior Venezuelan officials as kingpins and acknowledged the Venezuelan National Guard is deeply involved in drug trafficking. Obviously, in today's Venezuela, we are not just watching the rise of an authoritarian regime, we are watching the emergence of drug trafficking regime involved in networks that threaten and endanger the hemisphere. So finally, let me just say I welcome the President's decision to move forward with implementation of the Venezuela Defense of Human Rights and Civil Society Act, which, Mr. Chairman, you and I authored, and you were deeply involved in helping us draft and ultimately move through the Senate, and I appreciate that. And the announcement last week of targeted sanctions against 7 Venezuelan officials, including senior members of the military, intelligence services, and judiciary. In my view, we can go further, but this is an important first step. Let me reemphasize, these are targeted sanctions against Maduro government officials, not sanctions against the people of Venezuela. I look forward to hearing the administration's strategy for addressing the political, diplomatic, and security challenges that Venezuela presents, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.